Hello, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's workshop with Temporary Services. My name is Jake Usna, and I'm the content producer here at the Walker Arts Center and part of the team that puts on Insights Design lecture series. I just want to thank you all for coming and for being a part of this program. I also want to thank our partner for Insights, which is AIGA Minnesota. Insights, if you're not as familiar with it, we've been doing it here at the Walker since 1986. So it's been many a year. We've been able to kind of create a platform for amazing designers and design thinkers across the Midwest, across the US and the globe to come together, talk, think, and collaborate on what design can be. I also want to thank Shapco, which is a local printing press here in the Twin Cities, who for many years now, including this one, has donated the printing of our poster. If you are local to the Twin Cities or a Walker member, you've probably gotten one of these amazing posters that was designed by Brian Huddleston, one of the designers who works in our in-house design studio. And as is the tradition with all of our programming here at the Walker, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So the Walker Arts Center is located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota people. The site, which was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, holds meaning for Dakota, Ojibwe, and Indigenous people from other Native nations who still live in our community today. So we want to acknowledge not only where I'm currently situated in the Twin Cities, but also acknowledge the lands of where all of you may be situated as we are coming together virtually. This year, we've kind of come to the end of our in-person lectures, and now we're kicking off our expanded programming, including free workshops like this one. I just want to give a little bit of information on the other ones coming up. Next Saturday afternoon, we're doing another free collaborative workshop on publishing with Co-Conspirators Press out of Los Angeles. And then we started about a week ago, but we'll be continuing going for the next month or two, a collaboration with David Gisson, who is a designer, educator, and author of The Architecture of Disability, Building Cities, Landscapes Beyond Access. David is for our digital publishing platform, the Walker Reader. He is kind of guest editing a whole series of conversations around rethinking kind of sort of classic or design objects we deal with on regular to rethink what they might be outside of kind of the long and difficult legacy of eugenics and ideas of a quote unquote normal body. So the first one has already been published. It's on elevators, which might sound dry, but is actually really pretty fascinating. And then all of the recording lectures for this year's Insights, including the ones in person, the lecture that Temporary Services will be giving today, as well as the other ones, will all be made available for free on the Walker website and Walker YouTube channel starting early next month. And so I want to kind of first by welcoming our guest speakers, Temporary Services, who are based in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Chicago. And they're run by Brett Bloom and Marc Fischer, who are with us today. And Temporary Service began as an experimental exhibition space in a working class neighborhood of Chicago before transitioning its focus to publishing as a way of opening art and ideas to new possibilities. They also have Half Letter Press, which is a publishing imprint and online store initiated by Temporary Services, once again, based between these two cities. And Half Letter Press publishes works by Temporary Services, as well as distributes publications by other imprints, including Marc's other project, Public Collectors, which is focused on making marginal cultural artifacts more widely accessible. And so their kind of constellation of independent publishing endeavors is unified by its dedication to support people and projects that have had difficulty finding financial and promotional assistance through mainstream commercial channels. And without any more ado, I would like to turn it over and welcome both Brett and Marc. So thank you both again.
Thank you. Also, Brett's press, breakdown press.
Oh yeah, we've got the slide for that. It's coming.
Yeah. Thank you, Jake.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Thanks for inviting us. All right, so let's see. Well, thanks everybody who's joining us today. Gonna go over the agenda for the workshop with you all here really quickly. Once I get this started. Let's see. All right. Okay.
So we're going to give an overview on our work. We formed in 1998 with an emphasis on our publishing practice, which the Walker has been so good to support through their shop. And then we'll do lead a group exercise. And it looks like we have a small group, so we might be able to have maybe two groups of three, something like that, kind of similar to what temporary services was for a large part of our history. And then we'll have a share out at the end and should be able to finish everything in 2 hours. So if you're somewhere with nice weather like we are, you can enjoy the sunlight.
Yes, and we're going to spend about an hour giving the presentation, and then there'll be time. We were thinking maybe if you have questions about collaborative processes as they relate to publishing, that we can answer those questions maybe after all the work is shared at the end of the workshop. So you've already been introduced to us. We started working collaboratively in 1998, so we're in our 25th year now. And we've had many different configurations over the years. So we write about art, various issues, publishing ethics, aesthetics, politics, public art, prison abolition, a variety of other things. We create exhibitions and projects around the work of other people. And we've made over 124 publications just as temporary services. So we made more as Half Letter Press and then the other presses that we'll talk about as well. So this is a nice little animation. A collaborator and friend of ours, Keone Kochi, who's based in, I don't know, is she still in Kyoto, Mark, or is she's in a small city outside of Kyoto, I think.
Yeah, she's definitely still in Japan. We'll show some examples of our work with Keone, but she's about half our, little less than, not quite half of our age but was someone who was introduced to us by her professor in undergrad and ended up coming to Chicago and working with us for a bit. And that was 10 years ago. And at this point, we just keep coming back to finding things we want to include her in. And
yeah, so we started publishing with the very first thing we did in 1998. Continued to publish with exhibitions, with public projects, with just ideas and issues we wanted to explore. We wanted to, give our ideas sort of a concrete presence so they could circulate well beyond maybe the small audience in Chicago that was aware of what we were doing at the time. As we got older and also as the economy for this became harder and harder to maintain, we wanted to make something more sustainable and something that we could kind of that would provide an economy for our publishing interests. And that was in 2008, we started Half Letter Press. It does not there we go.
So we created this this kind of brief list of points, sort of inspired by the Black Panthers 10-point program. Also, we co-founded a space called Mess Hall in Chicago that created its own 10 points. We just have 7, but wanted to just kind of outline our values and really put that at the forefront of our work. So we strive to build an art practice that makes the distinction between art and other forms of creativity irrelevant. Our publications show that we'll get into. Builds and depends upon mutually supportive relationships. Tests ideas without waiting for permission or invitation. Champions the work of those who are frequently excluded, under-recognized, marginal, non-commercial, experimental, and/or socially and politically provocative. Makes opportunities from large museums and institutions more inclusive by bringing lesser-known artists in through collaborations or advocacy. Gaining access to the Walker's bookstore and doing talks like this always becomes opportunity to also talk about the work of other people in the process. puts money and cultural capital back into the work of other artists and self-publishers. We're always distributing at least some work by other people as well. And insists that artists who achieve success or renown devote more time and energy toward creating supportive social and economic infrastructures for others.
Yeah, this has been really critical to us. We don't spend as much time making exhibitions as we used to in the past. Like now it's much easier for us to collaborate on publications as we live in two different cities. We're in different phases of our lives. We used to live down the street, kind of down the street from it, on the same street. It was a bit of a drive, but we were on the same street in Chicago, and we would frequently gather, like at Marc's apartment, to work on publications and to have meetings. Don't really do that anymore. It's usually just virtual. But publishing, we can't stop. So it wasn't enough that we published as temporary services and then had to start a formal business that could do things that temporary services couldn't, half letter press. But when we got tired of working with each other, Marc is, I don't know, is it 80 publications now, Marc? How many are you up to now with Public Collectors?
Yeah, it's about a little over 80.
Marc has published a number. I'm not as prolific with the breakdown press. There just isn't the time, surplus time for me to do that, but it's something I actively engage in. But we really like sort of having this flexibility, and it's been really important collaborating to kind of give these release valves. Like when temporary services started, we all kind of like had to work on the same ideas and put the same amount of energy into it and had to all kind of agree that this is what was important to do. And sometimes we're doing 5 or 6 projects at a time, and it's really a recipe for burnout and exhaustion, and not very healthy. So we had to build in all kinds of release valves for the collaborative process. And this is one that's worked really well for Marc and I. Is just like Marc has a very specific set of aesthetics he likes to bring to half letter press and temporary services. I'm the same way. The concerns we have when they meet, they become a publication we share. When they don't really meet, we know by now what to bring and what not to bring. When they don't meet, then we do our own thing. And sometimes we'll publish as like not as a press, but just some little thing we make somewhere else with other people. So it's something that we're continually working on thinking about.
So this is sort of reverse chronology of most recent to older things, skipping the earliest stuff. But shifts in our work have been, I mean, a big shift was that in 2014 we acquired a risograph. Now we each own one, which allowed us to do a lot more production at home from our basements and offices. Shifting from photocopying back in 1998 to making offset editions. At first, everything we made was something that people would pick up in person at an event. And then a lot of times the earliest publications were often more like exhibition guides or project guides. And we realized over time that with a slight change in thought that these publications might work, well as standalone publications that would have an impact beyond events that might be over in 3 hours in some cases. But books and booklets linger beyond that. So pretty much everything we do at this point is basically works as a standalone autonomous publication that allows things to go into libraries and reading rooms and bookstores and exhibitions, all these different uses.
Yeah, we very much.
Oh, go ahead, Brett.
You get a sense here, getting down in the 50s and even lower, how the aesthetic changed. I mean, we were very much using Kinko's and Office and CopyMax to produce a lot of our publications. This is also one thing we kind of not so much outgrew, but just kind of ran out of energy or surplus time for, was collating and stapling and producing all the publications by hand ourselves. So we would often go photocopy these, then have a folding party with our group to put them together. And so that's very much not the case anymore. And as we've gotten increased budgets or access to funds to support what we do, we've been able to publish. I mean, Marc was just at a publisher we frequently work with, and he mixed in some gold paint into a color we had selected for a new publication that we hope is done very soon. So maybe if it catches the right light, it sparkles a little bit. And this is not something I think we would have fathomed starting off just with the very direct photocopied, sometimes even hand laid out publications that we made in the early days.
So this was, I think, 2004 for an exhibit in Nantes, France. By this point, we had made enough publications that sometimes that would be, rather than creating some other kind of project, we would just send a library of our work to exhibit, which are always displayed in a way that allows people to handle them and read them. A lot of times people would want to show our work and have no money, no budget. And this was something that you could like throw a library of our work into a shoebox pretty much, and for about $10 mail someone everything they would need to present what we do. So there've been quite a few iterations of this type of presentation. Usually the wall paint is a mix of whatever was at the gallery or the exhibition spaces, storage closet. You know, like for our entire history, we've always really tried to think about how to avoid waste, how to work as pragmatically as possible. Sometimes by necessity, sometimes out of choice.
Yeah,
Um,
you could see we call these things booklet clouds, and you can kind of see their shape. They're kind of made in these random shapes that are kind of like the shadows that the booklets make when they're turning around. And sometimes when there's time, we'll paint the strings so you get this kind of shimmering effect. Sometimes there's time for that, and sometimes there's not. But yeah, as Mark was saying, it's a very low budget strategy for presenting people with years and years of work really, really quickly.
And then this was in 2008. This was a publication that, could be taken apart and become its own exhibit. We were originally invited to buy spaces in Columbus,
Cleveland,
Cleveland.
yeah,
Sorry, Ohio. I didn't travel for that one. Brett and Salem Kolajulin, who was a member of the group at the time, went to Cleveland for that. But this was by far still has the largest print run of anything we've made. I mean, there must be over 20,000 copies floating around. But we were invited to do a project about working in groups, and instead we felt that the economic meltdown that was affecting us, affecting our peers, was far more important to figure out how to tackle. And to do that, we invited contributors from all 50 states, also Puerto Rico, to contribute writings about how they were affected locally, and really try to get into the texture of how the crash was impacting people in our field.
yeah. There were many stories from peers across the country about that, how the global economic crisis, which we're still kind of feeling the impacts of, it changed people's lives, and how in so many cases, like, artists are just not included in the conversations around their own economy, the greater economy, what's a supportive economy in the United States, versus really different ways of providing infrastructural support for folks in Europe. But it was really critical to us to get it to all 50 states and to Puerto Rico. Here's a slide of it presented in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. Is that right, Mark?
Carnegie Mellon, Miller Gallery. Yeah.
Yeah, they made this display themselves, just taking the paper apart and distributing it for free for people. In addition to making the paper so it could be taken apart to make exhibitions, we talked to folks about co-organizing conversations around the country, and there were like around 30 of those, like in Honolulu, in Juneau, in Philly, in New York City, I think I don't know if it's in San Francisco or Oakland, in LA, a variety of places. People got together to discuss maybe they discuss some of the things in the paper, but also things within their local context, because every city, every region has a very different economic context for being a cultural producer. So it's really critical that we try to foment any kind of conversation because it just wasn't happening.
Yeah, the previous slide had that was Chris Kennedy, Carolyn Woolard, and Cassie Thornton, who organized their own printing in New York that they create exhibits around. A fun thing also with the presentation at Carnegie Mellon in the next slide. Again, this was probably the cheapest exhibit they've ever organized. It was about $40 in shipping to send them newspapers, and then all the wall displays are created with the blue painter's tape that every gallery and exhibition space orders rolls of by the gross. So really, they just basically went into their closet and opened the mail and were able to make all of this into a really substantive show.
Yeah. So this is also, so that was 2009. The crisis was in 2008. We made the paper in 2009.
Yeah.
We also worked on this project as well as a response. Like, there's really a feeling, I think, not just by cultural producers and artists and those within our community, but just a feeling of abandonment. And this is like, George W. Was president at the time, and just sort of in charge of like a really abysmal turn in the economy. The stupidity of like extreme deregulation caused so much pain for people across so many different sectors of life. We were interested in sort of like, well, we had this conversation. What do you do when government abandons you, when you feel like the government has abandoned you? Are there ways of like building community, sharing creativity, coming together? And so we made a lot. We love books, so we made a library.
This is a presentation at Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts Museum in Philadelphia. And yeah, we made these banners that pull quotes from some of the titles. The banners are all made with this sort of reconstituted textile we made from plastic shopping bags, which fortunately have kind of been not fast enough, but have been gradually being banned from cities or made less ubiquitous. And people, of course, are free again to read the libraries, read all the books in the library. We also have objects we made that were inspired by the different books, furniture we designed. This one quote is a little hard to read, but quite nice in terms of our own practice from this book, Do It Yourself. It says, if we don't tell our own stories, then we risk leaving others to create conflicting versions, which will be the only ones that resonate. And so much of our work has been, telling the story of our ideas and our concerns as we go, rather than waiting or sort of hoping that art critics or art writers will take notice. We've also been written about quite a bit, having a long history, but always sort of, taking some control on our own of shaping the discourse around our work, and also just in exploring like the pleasures of writing together and writing with other people, and as writing as a form of collaboration.
Yeah, and here's some of the titles, like so you kind of get a sense of it. We have this publication is free for download from the temporaryservices.org website. We do provide an enormous amount of PDFs of selected publications, like for free download. For people to get in. This one's we made for free. So this is a project that's probably taken more time than any other project we've worked on. It took quite some time to organize it in the beginning. When did we start working on it, Mark? In 2004 or 2003? I can't remember.
I think 2003, but even before that, we had reached out to Angelo and he started working on it. So Angelo was a friend. He was someone I started corresponding with in around 1991 when I was in college and publishing a zine before temporary services started. He was incarcerated in California. We were pen pals for years and years and years. And, one of the things that's always, I think, nice to remember and think about with groups is like when you have a group of people, each person has, the group members have friends in common, but then they also have other friends outside of the group who maybe get pulled into working with the group, as ideas emerge that where that might make sense. And because we've always been so interested in this sort of informal, amateur creativity, people, creating things to solve problems that may or may not look like art. We'd had some discussions among our group about the different things prisoners invent out of necessity to deal with their incredibly restrictive environment. And this idea of inviting Angelo, who we already knew was this incredible draftsman and very good writer and storyteller, to see if he'd be interested in writing about some of the things he had observed other prisoners inventing during the course of his incarceration. And he sort of milled over this for a while, as was his way, and then gradually started sending us material, which we thought was at first going to be just a small photocopied booklet, but then he produced so much that it really needed to be a full-size book, and then later an exhibition as well. This is what an original page of his work looked like before it was, designed up a bit. Although we tried to kind of preserve the spirit of his originals as much as possible. So this is an invention. This is a battery-powered cigarette lighter. At the time, there was regulations in California where prisoners could smoke outside on the yard, but not inside their cells. At some point, all of this became moot because smoking was just completely banned in prison. Next slide, I think, shows this is layout from the book was originally published in 2004. It was out of print for a very long period of time. The original design files were lost. We were working with a publisher that no longer exists, White Walls. And a few years ago, as Half Letter Press, we initiated a conversation with another designer we'd worked with, Partner and Partners, who are based in New York. Although they do have a person in Chicago now too. And then they took on redesigning the book. There was also a lot of material that Angelo created after the first book was published that we were able to include.
One thing that should be said is that these inventions sort of run the gamut of like what the problems are trying to solve, and we're just giving you really a bare minimal taste of those things. It's everything from privacy to bathing, to entertainment, to crafting art supplies, to doing laundry, to lifting weights, a whole host of things. Here you see ways of boiling water using scavenged material gathered together, and we tried these out. They actually do work. The Stinger variation, the number 2, it's made with paper binder clips and rubber bands and melted together toothbrush handles, and you immerse the bottom part in the water and you just shove it into the wall socket, and it eventually boils, but it leaves a sort of very dark, the metal corrodes really quickly in this process, and it leaves it quite dark inside the cup. So it's quite a
really desperate way to make instant coffee or ramen or
exactly. You might want to make a very dark coffee if you're using this method. Here's another sort of desperate cooking method. Mark, you could take this one.
Yeah, this is using the metal cell fixtures like the desk chair and property locker as a cooking surface. I mean, so many of these things are about transforming the really terrible prison food into something slightly more edible through, frying, cooking, steaming. So this is rewrapping rolls of toilet paper and setting them on fire in such a way that they burn very hot and fast. I mean, you can imagine how messy and smoky it would be to try to do this, but such is the need for grilled cheese. Another kind of frightening electrical device, maybe not as scary as the immersion heaters, but you have maybe two outlets in a prison cell for two people, and possibly multiple appliances, where someone might want to have like a little fan going while they're listening to the radio, and their cellmate is shaving or something. If they have, I don't know if they, can't remember if they have electric razors, or watching TV with headphones or something like that. So this was a way of making a three-way plug, again using sticking paper clips into a wall outlet. You can do this at home and watch as like the lights in your home flicker.
So the early invitation, as Mark said, to Angelo was just to make a small publication out of inventions that Angelo had been mentioning to us, ones that he had seen, ones that he'd heard about, or ones that he invented himself. And then we eventually got an invitation to make an exhibition. And so we talked to Angelo, and he suggested that we make a full-size replica of his cell, just so people get the context for within which all these things were made. And so these are some of his drawings of the interiors of his cell. Sort of, you're looking at the one on the left, page 20, is the back wall with a window, a desk, and a seat. That looks like this, and more detailed drawings. So he made quite detailed drawings for us to follow in the recreation of the prison cell.
The thing to also just sort of keep in mind with this was that all of this entire collaboration was done through postal correspondence, right? I never spoke to Angelo on the phone until after he was released from prison. I tried to visit him. My visitation request was approved. I gave them like the prison like a month notice, and they approved it 3 months later after I'd already been in California and come home a long time before that. So all of this was done through the mail. This is fabrication of Angelo's prison cell executed at Mass MoCA, which was the first presentation of the project, with the museum fabricators following Angelo's drawings. We had a funny kind of scary moment. After the show had been up, we sent Angelo photos of the recreated cell, and in searching his cell, as guards routinely did, they discovered photos and freaked out, thinking that he had somehow gotten a film camera and photographed his cell and gotten the film processed. And then Angelo pointed out the little design discrepancies, and that it was a recreation, which I think was very entertaining for everyone. But yeah, the logistics of this, and also just working with an institution when one of your collaborators, can't just hop on email. Like, there's no internet in maximum security prisons, at least not like in his experience.
Yeah.
And even the book we made together, he mailed all of that material out to us, but when we tried to return it to him in book form, the mailroom wouldn't let him have the book because it showed how to make things that are contraband. So
Yeah, and just to give you a sense of how this book operated, so we're actually representing this work again after a long hiatus this fall. But it's kind of like it's an immersive exhibition. You see a bunch of the recreations. We've had to remake everything ourselves because, as Mark said, it's all contraband. Placed in vitrines, placed on the wall next to Angelo's drawings. There's a prison cell. In the past, we've made a reading room. It's a very immersive exhibition. It takes quite some time to go through. So the book is a way to kind of extend that experience well beyond the physical encounter of it. It's important for us that the books can carry a lot of information well beyond sort of the fleeting temporariness often of art exhibitions. Here's a case in point. So this is something we did in 2014. we never really made the sort of our publishing practice a part of an exhibition in this way, where for this we wanted to make a big meeting and printing room where we could meet with people to make publications. We could actually print them, put them up on the wall, display them. Here are some of the publications that we made during the run, like the 4-month run of the exhibition. It was quite an intensive process making all these publications. There was like 1 or 2 that we made, I think, sort of after this period, but they come out of this process. But it was also a time for us to sort of reflect on our own publishing. And that's a picture. There's Keone and I sitting in the middle there of the exhibition space, and Marc busily pretending to print. And yeah, so sorry, you can see the animations again. There we go. Oops. Sorry. It's like, okay. It was also time for us to really reflect on how our publishing had both been digital and in print from the very beginning. So we made often made our files in the beginning on the computer. Even if they were handmade, we'd scan them in to print them out, take printouts to copy at the copy shop. But we had PDFs that we could then put on websites. There weren't very many websites for artist practices in 1998. There were just a handful in Chicago and elsewhere. We had one, and I don't know if we had PDFs up at that time, but this is something we started to collect and eventually made them available. But the PDFs have really helped the work we do circulate massively beyond the sort of print runs. And this is an opportunity for us to reflect on the importance of publishing in both ways. There are things that each one can do that the other can't do.
It's also kind of just generally been our practice to try to demystify how everything we do works as much as possible. And, you know, we've both taught throughout our work and go back and forth on doing that. And so we like making this kind of information transparent. This was a frequently reprinted diagram by Clive Philpott, who for a long time was librarian at the Museum of Modern Art and just a great thinker about artist books, and had created this diagram to sort of think about where artist books overlap with other kinds of books. But we thought that it could maybe be reimagined for all of the new complexities of print on demand, ebooks, PDFs,
Different form.
ways.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Marc.
Yeah, no, just, I mean, different scales of, the digital spaces that print lives in, something he wasn't thinking about when that diagram was first made.
Just all the post-internet realities that we're faced with, and also just access to digital printing, large print runs, multiples, unique objects, just these things that kind of like we're starting to explode and spread and like really challenge the ways in which people are thinking about how artist books could exist. We were very interested in sort of like taking them out of the realm of the sort of rarefied luxury item and kind of finding ways to get them in the hands of lots and lots of people.
What's next? Yeah, and again, working with Keone Kochi to illustrate these different ideas. This was showing the sort of feeling of giving someone a stack of tactile printed publications versus sharing a cartoonishly long URL for a website that has no physicality. Just so often the way our work has spread has been, by gifting our publications to people who then figure out a way to include us in exhibitions or work with us in some other capacity. What's the next one?
Yeah. So here's a picture of a risograph and people self-publishing together, something we advocate for. This is in the print studios at many universities all over the place in the US and abroad. Just because it sort of it really demonstrates like how important the collaborative process is to us, and it's a really dynamic way to explore a lot of ideas together. This is something that's been really important to us. Like we have not been interested in commercial art world at all, actually, and the gatekeepers within institutional power structures. So the books are a way to sort of bypass that and to find audiences in a real diverse array of places. And this is something we think is super important, that the books just circumvent like this need to participate if you don't want to participate in these like traditional economies of artistic distribution. So things that books can do that digital publications don't readily do, and it's sort of before everybody had a little device to read on. Just remember encountering people reading the same books and having conversations on the L train in Chicago. This was something that was way more common. So this illustration by Keone sort of drawing out some of these things. There was actually a moment in time when it felt like the printed matter, New York's printed matter, our book fair could head in this direction. People were so giddy and excited about the digital potentials for books and experiencing books on phones, and fortunately that kind of faded away. We're sort of trying to think of like what that would look like, and the slight satire from Keone.
And then this booklet also had a few of these diagrams, again, for people maybe who are just sort of curious or kind of learning about how all this stuff works, showing some of the different sales models, distribution models of how books can travel through the world. I feel like now is actually sort of a fascinating time for this, because the story of the bankruptcy of small press distribution has become such a major news story, which was as a distributor that handles many small presses, not ours, we've never worked with them, but a lot of poetry presses, literary presses. And in the wake of their collapse, a lot of people are going to have to, if they can continue publishing, are going to have to really reimagine how their work is going to circulate without depending on one distributor as the main liaison between themselves and bookstores and the public.
Yeah,
probably right. Where are we at on time? Should we keep going? Okay.
Yeah, we should go through these quickly because we've got about 12 minutes left and a bunch of slides left, Mark.
Yeah, this is an essay I wrote a long time ago for a journal that was very short-lived and very minimally circulated. This was our first collaboration with Keone. We asked her if she would be interested in picking out examples from this text, which is basically an essay encouraging collaborative practices and group work. And with her involvement in this, it just made for a much nicer object than the way this originally appeared. I think we've reprinted it like 5 times. Someone just translated it into Spanish just so they could share it with their students. This is like another text that's had a really amazing life, and also just a really fun collaboration with her. We had never really worked with an illustrator in this way of letting someone go through the writing and generate their own responses. We maybe suggested a few ideas, but otherwise it's mostly things that she came up with.
Yeah. And so this is a publication kind of in relationship to the Self-Reliance library. We asked a bunch of fellow artist publishers within our community who we knew like whose publishing was really an extension of their activism or the important cultural work that they were doing, to reflect on sort of what is all this artist publishing for? What are some of the things that it can address and it can do in the world? What's the reason for it beyond it being the sort of like little eddy somewhere within this like subgenre, um, sub community of contemporary artistic practice. And so we asked a bunch of our friends and peers to write about what they're doing.
This is also, I mean, it's sort of typical of how temporary services often works, and that artwork newspaper was similar where, often we'll create a structure or a framework which is made far more interesting by the participation of other people than us trying to kind of control the narrative and tell just one story. This was the next sort of step was to invite a smaller group of artists to write, publishers to write more in-depth pieces about the way that waste shows up in their work and things they've learned in the process of making their work. Because again, like everyone makes things in different ways. We use offset printing, we use Riso printing. Some of these people, like Sarah Nichols, does letterpress printing. Emily Larned also uses both Riso and letterpress. So there are different processes at work.
We also gave them money to offset some of the waste as a part of the publication itself. But that was a follow-up to this publication, which Marc just reprinted. Is the second time we printed or third time now?
2 times for each publication.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
think 4
Okay,
times
yeah.
for What Problems Can Artists Publishers Solve?
We've been talking about and thinking about the waste in our practice, and also the huge amounts of book waste that's generated, maybe not so much within artistic communities in relationship to commercial printing, but it's there, and it's something we really think needs to be considered and accounted for. It's also a place for us to put our book waste on display. And so the page you see on the left here, when printing with a risograph, we have to do a lot of test prints. And so we save the paper we do those test prints on, and it often layers up with material from multiple publications, and it makes a nice way to sort of insert the waste into the book, and it makes each booklet slightly different. But here's an opportunity for us to reflect on things like the hidden waste in publishing, specifically like the water in publishing. This is relatively correct that it takes 3 gallons of water to make 1 piece of paper, and so a publication can end up, like a single publication can end up requiring an enormous amount of water. A print run can then exponentially amplify that. So we wanted to figure out a way to offset this water consumption, the most glaring ecological destruction that takes place from us making even these small little publications. And so we started, Marc, you want to explain this? I need a drink of water.
Yeah. So we started this project called Paper Toilet. I mean, the first thing we did was that we replaced toilets in our own homes with dual flush, low flow toilets as a way of saving water. But also, recognize it'd be far more effective if we could get some exhibition spaces, bookstores, places that hold a lot of public events to make this transition and help us do this on a larger scale. So this is the very first participant in Chicago, Pilsen Community Books. It's been like weirdly complicated. People have to check with their landlords. Most people are renting the spaces. They don't own the building that the bathroom is in. But Pilsen Community Books really supported this idea and let us replace their toilet. The next stop after that is the space Co-Prosperity in Bridgeport, followed by Compound Yellow, which is an exhibition space in Oak Park. And we're planning in the future to reach out to others who would like to participate and hopefully also find a sponsor to provide the toilets. We don't want to name check Kohler without them agreeing, but they make really good toilets that save a lot of water and are very historically supportive of the arts.
Yeah.
So,
But
but
unlike carbon offsets, where with this fantasy where you just sort of you pay for the waste you're gonna create and then it's done, it doesn't generate anything more for you out of that. You get to keep wasting. Um, this is cumulative. This adds up. Like you save water, you save a lot of water over time. You'll eventually save a lot more water than it was consumed in the production of the publication, and it's an aspect of it that we like. So, Mark, let's go through the rest. Let's mention this
yeah.
really quickly.
This is a free PDF you can get on through Half Letter Press. This was a book we made with Printed Matter long time ago about where we interviewed a number of groups whose work we admire. So much of the writing about groups is really mostly talking about their projects, but not talking so much about how the group makes decisions. What happens when someone leaves the group, what happens when someone in the group dies, you know, whether they work on a consensus model, a voting model, all of these kind of complexities that we basically felt like we had to interview groups to ask them the things we wanted to learn about, because we weren't finding those answers elsewhere. And that kind of like leads us to what we want to do with you. So this is our most recent temporary services publication. So way back in 2008, we were invited by a New York arts organization to propose some kind of enormous public project that we would have never been able to execute, through the kind of usual channels we're working in. So we came up with these 22 ideas. We just sort of threw all these different things at them, all of which would have like massively upended our lives had we been able to do any of them. And ultimately, they didn't choose any of the ideas. This was one which proposed preparing box lunches of the exact same food items and qualities of food that are served in cells to all prisoners who are in New York penitentiaries. Give away as many of these lunches as there are prisoners in New York to bystanders on the streets of Manhattan, so that all of them can experience a prison quality lunch for one afternoon. It's sort of remarkable that they wouldn't go for this. I mean, it's a fascinating idea. But so we, all of these things are these very short descriptions. They don't take into account budget, logistics. They just basically outline in a very succinct way something that we could expand upon if the organization wanted to bite. We didn't do any of these projects with them. We maybe did versions of things like this, a couple of them on our own. And then because this had never been published before, and because we thought it would be more interesting as a publication, we once again called on Keone to interpret some of these ideas, whichever one she found interesting, with drawings. This was one to create. Oh yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, no, it's just really important for us to get this out. Like some of these ideas, I don't think we'd want to do, or they're just, we have really different politics and relationship to some of them currently. But it was really important to us to share. Like we were asked, like we came and generated all these ideas. But the curator insisted that our project had to be about the Lower East Side. Everybody had to make projects about the Lower East Side. It was this giant survey exhibition. We wanted to work in a different part of Manhattan on something that was interesting to us. So sometimes, like even well-intentioned curators can have a very oppressive framework or structure. So this is just us reflecting back on maybe we should have pushed back a little bit harder at the time of this exhibition. Anyway, just wanted to throw that in there. This is the last slide, kind of where we started with the first slide. I'm gonna leave it up, but try to pop out of the presentation. Is it still visible, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're down to 3 people now. So I think we can make
2 people.